Welcome to this episode of the Intelligensis Africa Insights Podcast. Today, we're focusing on the West African nation of Togo. Togo is entering a moment of quiet crisis, one shaped not by a single event, but by a pattern of power consolidation, generational resistance, and strategic silence. At the center is Faure Gnassingbé, who has ruled the country since 2000 and now seeks to remain indefinitely through a new constitutional structure that eliminates direct presidential elections. In April 2024, Parliament adopted sweeping reforms that reshaped Togo into a parliamentary system without a referendum. The executive authority was transferred to the newly created position of President of the Council of Ministers, to which Faure Gnassingbé was promptly appointed. This move, widely described as a constitutional coup, triggered a powerful backlash. By June 2025, protests erupted across Lomé and other urban centers, led primarily by disillusioned youth, civil society actors, and diaspora voices under banners like "Touche pas à ma constitution." The regime responded with force: tear gas, live ammunition, internet blackouts, arbitrary arrests. At least 7 people were killed in just 3 days of unrest. Dozens more detained or disappeared. This is no longer just a domestic crisis. With ECOWAS wavering, media outlets banned, and whispers of alignment with the AES bloc, Togo is testing the limits of West Africa's democratic resilience. The consequences will ripple far beyond its borders. To understand the current unrest in Togo, we must begin with the country's deeply entrenched political dynasty. Since 1967, Togo has been ruled almost uninterrupted by a single family. First, by General Gnassingbé Ayadema, who seized power in a military coup and led for 38 years until his death in 2005. He was succeeded by his son, Faure Gnassingbé, who took power amid a constitutional crisis and violent protests. Faure Gnassingbé has now ruled for 2 decades. Despite constitutional reforms over the years, power has remained firmly in the hands of the ruling family and its party, UNIR, or Union for the Republic. The latest turning point came in April 2024, when Togo's parliament adopted a sweeping new constitution without a referendum. This new system eliminated direct presidential elections, replacing the presidency with a largely ceremonial role. Executive power was shifted to a new position, the President of the Council of Ministers, essentially a prime minister without term limits. Soon after, Faure Gnassingbé, leader of the ruling party, was appointed to that role. Critics and legal experts across the region quickly branded this maneuver a constitutional coup, a calculated legal restructuring designed to allow Faure Gnassingbé to hold onto power indefinitely without facing voters again. This quiet dismantling of electoral democracy has now triggered some of the most intense public resistance the country has seen in years. The situation on the ground in Togo has become increasingly volatile since early June 2025. What began as online dissent quickly spilled into the streets, sparked in part by the arrest of rapper and activist Amran, who had called for protests on the president's birthday. From June 5th through late July, Lomé and surrounding areas witnessed multiple waves of protests. These were largely youth-led, organic in nature, and often fueled by frustration over high unemployment, repression, and the erosion of civil liberties. Security forces responded with force. Demonstrators were tear-gassed, beaten, and in some cases, shot with live ammunition. According to a confidential security report, at least 7 people were killed during protests between June 26th and June 28th alone, with dozens more injured. Eyewitnesses described armed men in balaclavas, operating alongside security forces in unmarked vehicles. On June 27th and 28th, 7 bodies were recovered from local lagoons and lakes. Civil society groups claimed they were victims of extrajudicial killings by state forces. The government denies this. In total, over 80 people were arrested, including foreign nationals, journalists, and activists. Some were tortured, others simply disappeared. Meanwhile, the state escalated its control over the narrative. Internet access was deliberately restricted. Platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, Signal, and Telegram were blocked without warning. RFI and France 24 were suspended from broadcasting. Despite this repression, the protest movement, loosely grouped under the M66 coalition, pressed on, organizing demonstrations, encouraging election boycotts, and mobilizing diaspora support online. Municipal elections were eventually held on July 17th under heavy security. The ruling party, UNIR, secured a sweeping victory, taking over 1,100 out of 1,500 seats. But voter turnout was low, and many polling stations in Lomé remained empty. The message from the streets was clear. Large segments of Togo's population no longer believe the system offers them a voice. Now let's take a moment to talk about the producer of this podcast, Intelligensis Risk and Strategy Limited. In an era of mounting uncertainty, socio-economic and political tensions, rapidly shifting alliances, and democratic backsliding across West Africa, credible foresight is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. Intelligensis is a political risk and strategy firm that delivers grounded, regionally informed intelligence for clients who need to see beyond a headline. Intelligensis combines state-of-the-art data science technologies, artificial intelligence, field monitoring, and expert-level analytical tradecraft to synthesize all source information into valuable insights. Whether you're a development partner, diplomatic mission, investor, or international NGO, we offer in-depth political risk assessments tailored to national and subnational dynamics, strategic geopolitical analysis, and scenario planning, and early warning systems that help you detect instability before it erupts. Our work is trusted by decision-makers who need clarity under pressure and who know that context is everything. To learn more or inquire about our services, visit intelligensis.com or connect with us directly. Let's get back to our analysis of the political situation in Togo. Togo's political crisis is being shaped by 5 principal actors, each with competing interests, distinct strategies, and varying degrees of leverage over the country's fragile future. Let's begin with the first actor, the Faure Gnassingbé regime. The government led by President of the Council of Ministers Faure Gnassingbé and backed by the ruling UNIR party is pursuing what it calls institutional modernization. But in practice, it has engineered a system that eliminates presidential term limits, centralizes executive power, and ensures Faure Gnassingbé remains unchallengeable. The regime's strategy is grounded in control of institutions, control of security forces, control of the judiciary, and now, control of the electoral process through constitutional manipulation. Its core interest? Preserving dynastic continuity and shielding itself from electoral risk or external accountability. The second group of actors consists of protest movements, youth, diaspora, and touche pas à ma constitution. The most visible challenge to the regime now comes not from traditional political parties, but from a new wave of civil society actors. At the center is the movement touche pas à ma constitution, which translates to "Don't touch my constitution." These groups include young urban professionals, digital activists, student leaders, and diaspora influencers operating across Europe and North America. Their objectives are clear: a return to democratic governance, reversal of the April 2024 reforms, and accountability for human rights abuses. What they lack in formal political power, they compensate for with visibility, decentralized organization, and access to social media ecosystems, at least when the internet isn't being shut down. The third set of main actors comprises opposition parties like the National Alliance for Change, ANC, the Alliance of Democrats for Integral Development, ADDI, and the Democratic Forces for the Republic, FDR. Togo's traditional opposition, led by parties such as the ANC, ADDI, and FDR, has officially rejected the constitutional reforms and condemned the government's crackdown. But these parties remain deeply marginalized. Years of legal harassment, fragmented leadership, and co-optation have hollowed out their influence. They do, however, still maintain some relevance through coordinated legal challenges, participation in civil society-led protests, and appeals for international support. Yet, in the eyes of many younger Togolese, these parties are part of an older political order that has failed to deliver real change. The security forces and auxiliary militias make up the fourth group of main actors in Togo's ongoing political problems. The government's ability to suppress unrest rests squarely on the shoulders of the security apparatus. This includes the Togolese armed forces, the police, the gendarmerie, and increasingly informal militias. These militias, often operating in unregistered vehicles, partially masked, have reportedly worked in tandem with official forces to intimidate, abduct, and physically assault protesters. This hybrid model of repression allows the state to deny responsibility while sustaining a climate of fear. The military remains loyal to Faure Gnassingbé, largely because its leadership is intertwined with the ruling elite and benefits from patronage. The fifth and final set of actors in the political turmoil is the external international actors like ECOWAS, Amnesty International, and the international media. The international response has been mixed. Amnesty International and Reporters Without Borders have condemned the use of torture, arbitrary arrests, and restrictions on press freedom. ECOWAS, however, has taken a far more cautious stance. It has issued vague calls for stability, but has avoided directly challenging Faure Gnassingbé's legitimacy or the legality of the constitutional reforms. The regime has also lashed out against perceived foreign interference. On June 16th, it suspended RFI and France 24, accusing both outlets of endangering public order through biased coverage. In doing so, Togo has further isolated itself from media scrutiny and signaled to other regimes that authoritarian consolidation can proceed with minimal regional pushback. At the heart of Togo's current crisis are deep structural fractures in its political architecture, fault lines that have been widening for years but are now fully exposed. First, democratic erosion. While Togo officially remains a republic, its governing system has been hollowed out. Institutions that are meant to act as checks, like the judiciary, electoral commission, and parliament, have been steadily captured by the executive. The April 2024 constitutional changes only formalized a shift that was already underway, the disappearance of electoral competition as a real mechanism for change. Second, the growing divide between youth and elite governance. Nearly 60% of Togo's population is under 25. They face economic stagnation, unemployment, and limited mobility, while the political elite remains entrenched, aging, and insulated by decades of patronage. This generational disconnect is fueling a sharper, more uncompromising form of resistance. Young activists are not just calling for reform, they are demanding a complete overhaul of a system they see as permanently rigged. Finally, security overreach versus legitimacy. The regime's increasing dependence on force, military, police, and masked auxiliaries may deliver short-term control, but at the cost of long-term legitimacy. Every beating, every abduction, every information blackout chips away at public trust. And without legitimacy, even a tightly controlled state becomes brittle, unable to bend without eventually breaking. In sum, Togo is facing more than a political crisis. It is grappling with a deeper legitimacy crisis, where the structures of the state no longer align with the aspirations of its citizens. The international response to Togo's political crisis has been muted but not absent, revealing both the limits of diplomatic engagement and the growing tolerance for constitutional manipulation in the region. Let's begin with ECOWAS. Despite its formal commitment to democratic norms, the West African bloc has taken a cautious and non-confrontational approach. While expressing concern over instability, ECOWAS has stopped short of directly condemning Faure Gnassingbé or labeling the April 2024 reforms a constitutional coup. This restraint reflects a broader pattern. ECOWAS has grown hesitant to challenge entrenched regimes when no clear alternative exists, especially in contexts where coups and insurgencies have destabilized nearby states. Meanwhile, Togo's relationship with France has cooled. On June 16, the government suspended French broadcasters France 24 and Radio France Internationale for allegedly endangering public order through critical coverage. This move was a clear signal Togo is willing to restrict foreign media in order to control its domestic narrative. It also reflects a broader trend of francophone regimes turning away from traditional partners amid accusations of neocolonial interference. Human rights organizations, however, have been far more direct. Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, and the Togolese diaspora have issued sharp condemnations. They've documented arbitrary arrests, the use of live ammunition, internet shutdowns, and the targeting of journalists. Their message is unambiguous. the Gnassingbé regime is engaged in systemic repression and democratic backsliding. But without coordinated pressure from regional blocs or global powers, the regime has so far been able to act with near impunity. Looking ahead, Togo's trajectory hinges on the interplay between state coercion and societal resilience. We assess two plausible short to medium-term scenarios, one more likely than the other. In the first scenario, the regime successfully suppresses unrest, but the protests recur. In this more probable outcome, the government continues its strategy of repression, arrests, surveillance, and information blackouts. Backed by the military and a tightly controlled parliament, Faure Gnassingbé maintains his grip on power. The ruling party consolidates its hold over local and national institutions, and the new constitutional order is normalized through elite consensus. But the cost is legitimacy. Popular resentment simmers below the surface, especially among urban youth, civil servants, and the informal sector. Rather than dying out, protests may re-emerge in cycles, triggered by flashpoints like arrests, economic shocks, or diaspora mobilization. Indicators to watch include increased censorship or social media bans, expanded role of irregular militias, hardening of rhetoric against civil society groups. In our second but less likely scenario, the protests and diplomacy force partial concessions. This scenario is less likely but not impossible. If the protest movement sustains momentum, especially with support from the diaspora and continued documentation by human rights organizations, it could eventually compel the regime to enter negotiations. This might result in partial concessions, the reinstatement of presidential elections, legal reforms, or even limited political liberalization ahead of future legislative cycles. Crucial here is external pressure. A shift in ECOWAS posture, triggered by diplomatic lobbying or new leadership, could push the bloc to demand reforms as a condition for future cooperation. Watch for signs of elite fractures, especially within the military or ruling party. Statements from ECOWAS calling for dialogue or constitutional review. Increased coordination between civil society and formal opposition parties. Ultimately, without credible reform, the risk of radicalization, especially among disenfranchised youth, will grow. That risk may not take the form of insurgency, but rather more confrontational protest tactics and international advocacy efforts designed to isolate the regime. Togo's political crisis carries implications well beyond its borders. First, it threatens to undermine regional norms around democratic governance. If Faure Gnassingbé is able to entrench dynastic rule through legal manipulation without meaningful ECOWAS pushback, it could embolden similar re-engineering in other fragile democracies across West Africa. This isn't just about one country. It's about the precedent being set in a region where constitutional order is already under siege. Second, ECOWAS's credibility is on the line. The bloc has taken a hard stance against military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. But when civilian leaders extend power through legal subterfuge, ECOWAS has often responded with silence or soft diplomacy. This double standard risks undermining its own governance protocols, especially when repression is dressed in constitutional language. And now there's a new twist. Togo has begun signaling alignment with the AES bloc, the alliance of Sahel states led by military juntas in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Though not yet formalized, even the hint of this realignment could destabilize ECOWAS cohesion, embolden anti-Western narratives, and fracture cooperation across the region. Finally, for international donors and partners, the stakes are growing. Should engagement continue with a government sliding into authoritarianism? Or should aid and cooperation be conditioned on reform? Expect recalibrations, especially from European Union actors, development banks, and human rights-linked funding streams. As Togo moves into dangerous territory, silence becomes complicity, and neutrality increasingly is not an option. As Togo edges deeper into political uncertainty, several critical flashpoints merit close monitoring. New rounds of protests, particularly tied to economic grievances or further arrests, increased visibility of informal militias alongside state forces, potential fractures within the ruling elite or security establishment, any shift in ECOWAS's diplomatic posture, Signs of coordination between diaspora influencers and domestic protest leaders, strategic foresight suggests that absent genuine reform, Togo's cycle of unrest will likely recur, driven by youth-led resistance and a widening legitimacy gap. In the words of a Togolese activist, "They have the power, but we have the future." The regime may suppress the present, but it cannot indefinitely silence a generation demanding its turn to lead. We'll be watching closely. This episode of the Intelligensis Africa Insights Podcast was brought to you by Intelligensis Risk and Strategy Limited. Be sure to subscribe to our channel wherever you listen to your podcasts so you don't miss our next episode.